Hello and welcome to the complete guide on the Alapin Sicilian. Now, if you play e4, you probably hate seeing the move c5 because, well, if you just go for the main line with knight to f3 and d4, black has a ton of different ways to respond, and if you want to play successfully e4, you really need to be well versed in all of those main variations. So today I'm going to be showing you a sneaky variation, the c3 Alapin, which completely takes the game into your hands. You're no longer going to have to memorize all of those different variations, and you get to decide in which way the game will go. As always, there is a PGN file in the description below, so make sure you check that out. You're watching the Chess Geek channel. We upload every other day, so make sure you subscribe. And without any further ado, let's jump straight in. Now, first, what's the conceptual idea behind the move c3? Well, our main idea is completely undeniable. We want to go for d4, and if black allows us to get in the move d4 without any sort of compensation for black, we're going to be really happy. You can certainly imagine in a situation where we get d4 and let's say they trade, we have complete control on the center, our knight can develop, and we're simply going to be in complete control of the game. Now, it must be noted that the move d4 and setting it up with c3 does have an issue, and that is the knight here on b1 doesn't have the best way to get into the game, but usually this is a very temporary issue and we're going to solve it quickly either by letting them trade, or in some cases, if the pawn stays on c3, we're very happy to maneuver the knight via d2 and get it into the game like that. Now, as I mentioned, with the move d4 being such a huge and clear threat in this position, black has only a few ways to successfully respond to it. And what this really revolves around is counterattacking our center. Black needs to get some stake in the center for themselves, and that means attacking this e4 pawn. And therefore, the two main lines that we're going to delve deep into in this video is knight to f6 and d5. These are the two ways that black can try to equalize. And so in this video, we're going to be taking a look at both of these moves. But I actually want to start with the move d6, and this really is a placeholder for any other move. If they play a6, if they play g6, any move that does not directly challenge our center, like d5 and knight to f6, because I want to show you how quickly this sort of position can get out of hand for black, and how quickly we can seize complete initiative and control over the board. It should come as no surprise that we play the move d4. We were preparing this very heavily, and so we get to play it on the board. Now here, if they were to take, this makes matters even worse for them, because now they give this c3 square for the knight, they allow us to simply develop and have a massive center. So their best option in this sort of position is to keep the tension on the board and play, for example, a move like knight to c6. Their idea is if we go d5, they're going to get this annoying e5 square. So we first play the move knight to f3, we control e5, and later we meet the move knight to f6 with the move d5, and already it's a very troubling position. If they come back, they wasted time and we have a massive center control, and if they come to e5, well, now we can very comfortably trade over here and continue very naturally by giving this check, and we're of course very happy to trade the bishops off in a position like this and play a very calm move like f3, where we are restricting their knight from having mobility, we are protecting our center on e4, and if they try to attack this center with the move like e6, we can continue to defend it with c4, and we have built a massive pawn center control over here. Also notice all the pawns are on light squares, which is why we traded off our light square bishop, and we're left with a very powerful dark square bishop that will sit on e3 and be an absolute monster. And generally speaking, I mean, we are super happy in this position. Now, of course, this was just one variation, but it goes to show how quickly we can get a massive center control if they don't contest our center and if they allow us to just launch forward with d4. So if they play a random sideline that you've never seen before, chances are d4, and you're going to get a huge initiative and a big advantage from the beginning. So let's now take a look at the serious responses that black has, and I'm going to start with the move d5. Now, after they played the move d5, their intention is that after we take, which is what we're going to do, they recapture with the queen. Now, on first glance, this might look that the queen is in the center, that's good for us, but not always. And specifically here, black's point is that because of the pawn on c3, we cannot kick away this queen with knight to c3, and therefore the queen is actually, for the moment, quite safe in the center. Now what we're going to do, and again this shouldn't come as a surprise, we go d4. We immediately try to utilize our pawn on c3 to grab space in the center. Now the main move in this position is for black to take this pawn. Now, we're going to explore also what happens if they don't take the pawn in a second, but I first want to look at this. Now, this is typically not a very dangerous position because what we can very comfortably do is simply take the pawn back. And it's true that we have an isolated pawn, and this is what black is trying to go for, but in exchange, we're the only ones with control in the center. We have very easy development, and that's the key. The pawn on c3 is now on d4, and so this knight is going to come in with tempo, and the queen on the center is now going to be not so strong. Now, we have to be careful, and so if they go knight to c6, we cannot immediately go knight to c3. We're going to hang this pawn, but first we can very comfortably defend the pawn, and later prepare the move knight to c3. Now, they're going to likely continue with bishop g4. This is a very natural move, pinning the knight, trying to add pressure to this pawn, but we can go knight to c3 because notice that if they go for the tactical idea of bishop takes f3, knight takes d5, and in the end, whoops, we have a fork and we're winning material. So that's one of the nice traps that can exist if they're not so careful, and so here they're going to have to bring their queen back. But the second the queen goes back, notice that now the opportunity of playing d5 has arrived, and usually that is a very strong idea. So we go d5, and we're already winning material. We are completely winning. If they move their knight, for example, bishop e5, we're winning. We're threatening to win the queen. They have to, I suppose, bring the knight back, and this is just a complete mess for black. So this is how quickly the position can get very dangerous. Now, they can go, admittedly, and play queen to a5, and therefore d5 is not as scary, but it's still what we go for, because we're grabbing space and we have the initiative. Now, in this position, let's say they go knight e5, they're adding pressure to the knight, very logical. Once again, we're going to give this check, and they're going to drop the bishop back, bishop d7. Now here we're happy to trade, and in the resulting endgames in this position, not that this is really an endgame, but once pieces have been traded off and the position has become a bit more clear, usually white is happier because, again, we have completely uncontested control in the center. And if they want to, play a move like e6, that's going to come with a lot of risk, as you're about to see. So we can continue by castling. And if they go knight to f6, they're developing pieces. We go rook e1, and like I said, e6 is just not a move that is possible. Here we can take and then take that pawn right back. Now, alternatively, it should be noted, if they play a move like rook to c8 here, we can continue by going bishop f4. And once again, we have tactical ideas in this position because we have development and our king is safe. They do have some developed pieces, but their king is so weak, and we're going to utilize that fact. For example, in this position, they're actually compelled to give away the exchange with rook takes c3, because if they don't do this, and for example, they play e6, well, guess what? Again, we can take and take that pawn. If they play g6, for example, to develop the bishop on the other side, well, now this pawn is also going to take some damage. We can go queen to b3. They develop their bishop, and now even d6. And there's a nice idea here. After e6, a rook sacrifice becomes very strong. This is checkmate, and if they come to f8, this is not going to end well either. After knight to g5, the f7 square is really, really weak. So if we take a step back, this is why in this position, the best move for black is actually to take this knight here and take a pawn as well. But again, this is just, nothing compared to the position we have. We're up material, we have better development, our king is more safe. This is such a stunning position. We can go bishop d2. This might look like a retreating move, but of course we are setting up the very nasty c4 here. And so the knight moved away from that, but now rook to b1, and we're actually following a game here that continued with b6. And ladies and gentlemen, after knight to d4, black simply resigned because there is no way to continue this position. Again, you have so many issues. For example, if you go e6 and try to develop the bishop, well, now we go c4, the queen's attack. Then we go queen to f3, we're threatening to infiltrate on a8, so they have to retreat to defend. And now we go knight to b5, we're threatening this a7 pawn, so again they have to defend. And then bishop f4, and in fact now they can no longer defend everything. They can't defend the pawn while simultaneously defending against the threat of queen to a8, and not being on the square on b8. I mean, this position is completely becoming overwhelming here, and we are completely winning. I mean, there is no debate on that. And this is why black resigned. I mean, it should be noted, they can go g6, but once again, we have some tactical ideas. For example, we can even go h3. And if they move their bishop, a nice queen forking idea here exists. Ladies and gentlemen, there are a few more lines that I want to take a look at in this d5 variation. Let's look at takes, queen takes d4. We have takes, takes. And we had this position, and previously we looked at bishop g4, but what about the very sharp e5, which is a very common idea for black. Their point is that if we take, they're going to trade and then play bishop to g4, and they're going to win back the pawn. And so what we should do instead is, once again, we're going to play knight to c3. Now, if they move their queen, we have the move d5 coming, so their best theoretical option is bishop b4, but now the very simple bishop d2, we're attacking the queen once again, and they're very much compelled to take, but now we take, and this sort of position is very good for us. We have the two bishops, therefore if they take, the center will inevitably open, which will benefit the two bishops, and if they instead try to lock up the center with e4, which is a theoretical continuation, well, we have a very nice idea of going knight to e5. And I'm in fact going to let Kramnik with the white side show you a little bit about how you can play this sort of position. This is a grandmaster game example. We had rook to h2, a nice idea, trying to perhaps set up the move bishop g2, but also simply just defend over the second rank. And it might seem, at first glance, like black is sort of getting some play here. But if you just proceed a little bit cautiously with the white pieces, you're much better, because notice that the bishop is hanging, our king is safer than the opponent's king because of the light square issues that exist and the fact that we have the two bishops, and the rook is going to get into the game. And so if you consider all of these factors, you'll notice that this position is completely fine and in fact better for white. And that becomes abundantly clear in this situation where the queen was forced into the eyesight of the bishop, and now the very stunning rook takes h5 sealed the game, and in fact black resigned. And so that is a very nice example of how you can use the two bishops in this variation of e5 where they're very much forced to give away their bishop pair. And so if we back up for a moment, I want to look at one final variation here, which is what happens if they don't take, because it might seem like this is a much better and improved version for black where they don't allow the knight to come to c3, but this has its own issues. If they play, for example, knight to f6, we're simply developing. And with the pawn here on c5, there's also the issue of eventually taking this pawn and simply being up a pawn. You can certainly imagine with the bishop on e3, that becoming a concrete threat. So bishop g4, we go bishop e2. Both sides are developing, but typically we have a bit stronger development. And for example, castles, and we have more center control, we have the open e-file, we have better development and a safer king. White is much better here. It should also be noted there are sometimes opportunities to go more ambitiously and grab some space. For example, c4 is one of those opportunities, and after the queen moves back, we have d5, and the knight has to move, and now we can continue by simply castling. And notice that in this sort of position, again, we have more space, we have a huge hold on the light squares. This bishop, it's not so clear or easy to get it into the game. And tactically, we are much, much better because their king is in the center. So for example, nothing works for them. If they go for this tactic, nope, queen to a4, and we're winning the knight. Very good position. We have complete control, nothing to worry about. And that takes us, ladies and gentlemen, to the second main line that black has, which is the move knight f6, which, very similar to d5, aims to simply counterattack the center and therefore not let us get the move in d4 as easily. What we're going to do here, though, is play e5, because the knight on f6 gives us this opportunity to get tempo and grab more space in the center. We continue by going d4, they're going to take, and here I recommend capturing back. Now I should also note that if you don't like the recommendation that I'm about to show you, you can also very much go and consider the move knight to f3 here, utilizing the pin, and this gets very interesting, knight to c6, bishop to c4. There's a lot of very interesting pawn sacrifices here where we get a lot of compensation for the pawn. So you can definitely, look at this on your own if you think that the recommendation I give is not so much in your playing style, but this is a very solid approach. We have more center control, and that is basically what stems our slight but not negligible advantage. And so for example, knight to c6, we go knight f3, they go d6, bishop c4, and it's very natural, right? After knight to b6, we drop the bishop to b3. It should be noted, if they try to take and simultaneously defend the knight, we can take and simultaneously attack the knight with our queen, and they're in a very similar predicament. After e6, we castle, and they're very passive. Their bishop doesn't develop, their other bishop is also not going to get the same scope that it would want, and so if we take a step back, their main move is by far knight to b6, we go bishop b3, now they take, and it is true that in this position we trade queens if they want it, but this endgame is surprisingly good for us. The engine gives this roughly equal, but practically speaking, because of this pawn on e5, we have more space. Additionally, our bishops are going to have a brighter future. It might not seem like that because they also have the 2 bishops, but notice that our bishops have far more useful and juicy diagonals that they can seize control over, especially this e3 and f3 diagonals. And so this is sort of where our play comes in. And again, objectively, this is roughly equal, but practically white does hold better chances to make something of this position. And I think this master game example that I'm about to show you is a great illustration of this point. Knight to d2, we castle, we bring the rook to the center, we bring the knight to the center, super natural. Again, the bishops very powerfully here, controlling over this diagonals, and again, everything is natural. We castled, brought the rook in, brought the knight in, brought the bishops in. As you'll soon see, we're going to play bishop d4, centralizing the bishop and defending the one threat that black was giving. And after rook to d7, b3, we kick away the knight, and bishop c5. In this position, the game ended very shortly after rook h to d8, and there was a beautiful ending after bishop takes, rook takes, and we had this huge trade. In the end, notice that this knight was actually trapped. It cannot come back here, or here, or here. It had to go to b1, but now bishop c2 and the knight is simply trapped. And that kind of goes back to our idea of the control that we have, the fact that our bishops were superior to the counterpart bishops that black has. We have better control over the open board, and that leads to very simple wins like this one where we won the knight. I also want to quickly note that it's true that they could have traded here, which was an improvement over the game, but this is also not very sufficient. I mean, we can go knight to b7 here, and then knight to d6, and the knight sits super well, hitting the bishop, hitting the rook, hitting the pawn. The bishop is very nice, cutting over these light squares, and again, the knight is out of play. And ladies and gentlemen, that takes us to the end of the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Make sure you subscribe if you are new around here. Check out the PGN files in the description, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.